context is that through Libertas, we work on a number of policy issues, right? So years ago, we got the homeschooling laws basically repealed. There were all these like requirements. If you wanted to homeschool, you had to use the curriculum that they provide, and like they didn't enforce it very well. But anyway, so now it's the wild, wild west for homeschooling, right? We filed a lawsuit against Common Core when that came out. So we were battling Common Core for a few years, and we battled truancy laws. By the way, I don't know if anyone knows, like no one knows this. You may because you voted on it, but even legislators who vote on things don't always know, like, you know, what they voted on.
I read every bill.
Yes, president company excluded, right? But Utah now has no compulsory education laws for the next school year. We got a law passed that suspends compulsory education, truancy, all that kind of stuff for the next school year. So anyways, you know, what's another example? Special needs scholarships. Our organization was behind that, where the legislature now created tax credit scholarships for special needs kids. So all of this is to say that we work in the system. We're trying to change the system. We're trying to enact good education. But it's like the proverbial putting your arm in the Mississippi, trying to like stem the tide of all the problems that are happening. I have no delusions of grandeur that we're going to go up to the Capitol and we're going to solve all the problems, rainbows and puppies and unicorns, yay, right? These are big problems. And to understand the problems, we have to go back in time a little bit. Anyone know who Horace Mann is? Pop quiz, a couple people. Okay, 1852, Horace Mann is basically the father of our modern public education system. 2 N's, M-A-N-N. 1852, he goes to what was then Prussia, basically mostly Germany, kind of. And he sees this highly ordered school system and is impressed. Because in America, we have all these like cottage homes and little, you know, backwater, one classroom, you know, type of things. And he comes back and in Massachusetts, basically starts public schooling and creates literally what was called the factory model of schooling. You think about the industrialization of the economy at the time, and they were understanding how they could have these factories and do all these amazing industrial things. They basically took that process and applied it to children. And children were the raw material, and they had literally they called them factory schools, and that was the mode of education. So that became the system that that was utilized by a few decades later by some social reformers. John Dewey and John Goodlad among them. So parents, you get homework too if you don't know who John Dewey is and not familiar with his book, My Pedagogic Creed. You may want to Google that later. But I'll read you a little part of it. So John Dewey is like really the brains behind the modern public education system. Horace Mann and his allies kind of created the infrastructure, but did not have the ideological intentions that people like John Dewey and John Goodlad had. So they said, oh, here's a system. We can now utilize this system for our ends. Well, I'll give you a little sample. Here's Dewey. The role of the schools in building up forces and factors whose natural effect is to undermine the importance and uniqueness of family life. I'll read that again. The role of the schools is to build up forces and factors whose natural effect is to undermine the importance and uniqueness of family life. So John Dewey was a socialist atheist. And he saw, well, I'll read the next quote before I explain this. Here's the second one I'll read from him. The teacher always is the prophet of the true God and the usherer in of the true kingdom of God. Why would an atheist talk about God and the kingdom of God? Well, as a secular humanist, his God was government. He saw the state as God. And he saw the individual as subordinate to the collective. And so John Dewey really accelerated the implementation of a system that is socialist in nature, that tries to disrupt family life, that tries to encourage children to become part of a collective by suppressing individuality in favor of collectivism. Now I'm only giving you a little like tip of the iceberg here, but there's so much involved in Dewey and Goodlad in creating the infrastructure and the curriculum and the processes that are the foundation of the problems that we have today. So similar around the same time, then you have the National Education Association. They're the group that just voted that, hey, we're going to go do public opposition to anyone who opposes CRT, and we're going to, push this in elementary schools, right? That's the NEA today. They're the group that killed vouchers here in Utah a decade ago by dumping in $2 million into a campaign to overturn vouchers that the legislature had passed. So here was the NEA in 1934 during the Goodlad, John Dewey era. The major function of the school is the social orientation of the individual. It must seek to give him understanding of the transition to a new social order. Now, for anyone who's God-fearing, Christian, family-loving, whatever, right? This social order is basically inimical to what you stand for. And yet this is what the pioneers of the modern public education system sought to do and what we've inherited today. So my theory is that all of the angst that we have and all the whack-a-mole that we play all the time over all the big issues that come up might have the effect of steering our attention away from some of these systemic problems that we need to understand. Imagine a world where we could snap our fingers and problem X goes away, whatever X is. Critical race theory, comprehensive sex ed, social emotional learning, like whatever your thing that fires you up about what's happening in the school system, snap your fingers, goes away. Then what? Are you content with the system? Do we think that we have high quality education? Are there no problems with the process, with the system? Can we go back to sleep? And you know what I mean? Like the systemic problems are significant. And I'm not the only one who says this. The government itself has said this. In the 80s, the federal government put together what was called the National Commission on Excellence in Education. And they did an 18-month review to try and understand schools across the country. How are we doing? How are things performing? They go around, they do all these meetings, public events, classroom visits, research. They come out with a report. Here's how education is doing in America in the 80s, mind you. They say, the educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity that threatens our very future as a nation and a people. Get this. If an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. As it stands, we have allowed it to happen to ourselves. Now, I'm a product of the 80s, and as I talk to parents, go to conferences, things like that, consistently it's like, oh, yeah, there's a lot of problems today, but when I grew up, things were great and none of these problems happened. And yet, when we were growing up, most of us, this was the assessment. And I think it's a fair one when you look at, for example, let's go back to the late 1800s. Here's a little quiz for you. This was given to 8th graders. I love doing these. I have a bunch of these available, but I just grabbed one today. This is an 8th grade test from 1895. Think how well you would perform, let alone your 8th grader. Question number 1, name the parts of speech and define those that have no modifications. What's a part of speech? Number 2, find the interest of $512.60 for 8 months and 18 days at 7% with no calculator, right? Like this is 1895, okay? 8th graders. Number 3, describe 3 of the most prominent battles of the Revolution. Maybe we could pull that off, maybe. Number 4, write 10 frequently mispronounced words and indicate pronunciation by use of diacritical marks and by syllabication. Number 5, name and locate the principal trade centers of the United States. So I know many awesome teachers. I am very critical of some of the systemic problems we have, but never of the individuals who are trying to work within the system. In fact, one of my favorite people in the world died a couple years ago, John Taylor Gatto. Anyone know the name at all? Come on, one person, 2 people, all right. Okay, another homework. You guys, your minds will be blown if you go read a little bit about John Taylor Gatto, Gatto. Text yourself, write yourself an email, jot a note. John Taylor Gatto. Everyone on Zoom is Googling right now. John just passed away. He was a 30-year public school teacher in New York. 30 years in the trenches. He was awarded New York City Teacher of the Year, and then he was awarded New York State Teacher of the Year. In the very same year where he was awarded New York State Teacher of the Year by the education establishment, this is like the PTA and the union, and right, they like give these little awards out. The very same year that he's given the highest award for New York State, he writes an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal titled, "I Quit, I Think," in which he goes on to lay bare his complaints with his own profession and what he was seeing happen. His main contention, as he said it in his op-ed, was that he was hurting children more than he was helping them. Despite all his best efforts, the system was setting children up for failure, and it was dumbing them down. This became the title of his book that I read before I got married to my wife. And so one of the very first things I had, my girlfriend at the time do was like, read this book, see if you agree with me. And so now we homeschool our kids because she read the book. He has another book called The Underground History of American Education, which is also really interesting. But he goes on to explain some of the systemic problems that we overlook when we're playing whack-a-mole up here with all the different issues, right? I mean, it's like, this might be a silly example, but you ever gone to the mall? Do those still exist? I think there's still malls, right? And there's a sale at like Nordstrom's or whatever, marked down from $700 to $450, and you might get sucked into buying this thing because you think it's or like Black Friday, right? This happens all the time. Marked down from $100 to $30, and like normally it's 20, and they just play these games, right? And you walk away like, all right, I had a good deal. Wait, did I really have a good deal? And I feel like a lot of that. I feel like that a lot when it comes to education policy. We think we're winning this battle, or we have this little victory, right? But for every step forward, we're being like pushed back time and again. And there's all these big problems happening that John Taylor Gatto would often write about. And I could rattle off all the test scores to substantiate what that 18-month report found. That back in the 80s, it was an age of mediocrity, let alone today. And yet the government's response is more money, the teachers, the unions, everyone, it's more money, that's what our system needs, it's more money. And yet in every school district that's spending more money, the test scores decline. Not that test scores themselves are the barometer of success, but it is one way to measure performance. And the statistics are just abysmal. But what resonates more with me than test scores is character, is understanding of our world, is critical thinking. And so when I pause to think, how is the system doing today? I'm reminded of a quote that was shared by this evangelical pastor. So it's in a religious context, but this has pedagogical and political consequence or relevance as well. In a religious context, he says, can we as Christians really send our children to Caesar's schools and be surprised if they return home as anything but Romans? So in a political context, right, if I'm a conservative or if I, whatever, it's like, can we surrender our children to a system whose pioneers and architects were socialist atheists who tried to dumb down individuals to enhance the collective instead, and really be surprised when our children are going to Bernie Sanders rallies and all the rest? My contention really at the end of the day is that Caesar, as we can call him, the system, leaders, those in power, whatever term you want to use, prefer an ignorant people. Why do you suppose that is? Okay, the C word. It's easier to control people who are ignorant. Why? Why is it easier to control ignorant people?
Because they'll just believe what you tell them.
They don't, right.
They don't have their
okay. Those who don't know, those who don't learn from the past are condemned to repeat it, right? And I actually bought, about 9 months ago, I bought all the social studies books that are being used in like 4th to 8th grade, something like that. The more popular ones, right? eBay and Amazon, I kind of got a big stack. And I started reading through all these books and focusing on the era of like the Revolution, Constitution, all that kind of stuff. And as you might imagine, most of these books cover, you know, Patrick Henry said this, and on this date, this battle happened, and blah, 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 right? All the kind of names and dates and facts and that we feel good about doing a pop quiz to our kids and thinking that they're learning something. What's the problem? None of these books, not a single one, talked about the ideas. No philosophy, no Enlightenment era, no Judeo-Christian influence, no classical liberalism, no tension of power versus the people, sovereignty. At best, they said, oh, they were upset about no taxation without representation. But it was so much more than that. And so kids today are not being taught to learn from the past so as not to repeat it. They're being taught about the past, right? They're like walking in a museum, and here on the left, you can see from the 1760s, these people fought. Okay, let's move on. Cafeteria time, kids, right? Like there's no learning that happens. And so can we be surprised today when those lessons are absent, when they don't really understand the lessons of the past and how to apply them? So I bought all those books because we're doing a project for the Teletwins, a whole like American history textbook and curriculum, and it's going to take us another half a year or more to be done. But we're really involved in this right now. So I've been reading a lot of history. It's a fantastic book I'm reading right now about the moral case behind the Declaration. And as I read these books, I'm blown away at the level of understanding of the public. Just the comprehension level. I mean, certainly like this 1895 quiz, like the fact that you can calculate interest without a calculator is pretty impressive. But just the understanding of the Lockean, the John Locke, you know, life, liberty, property, these essential truths that form the basis of our country. And there's this really interesting quote that John Adams wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson about like 1815. They wrote tons of letters, but this particular one was in 1815. And here's what John Adams says. He says, the revolution was in the minds of the people, and this was effected from 1760 to 1775 in the course of 15 years before a drop of blood was drawn at Lexington. Lexington and Concord, where the shot heard around the world, right? I'm not going to give you a pop quiz. It's not 1895, but you can all pretend that you knew what Lexington was because we all know that, right? So what John Adams is saying is that we think of the revolution as starting in Lexington. But the real revolution started, according to John Adams, 15 years prior, as all these people were writing letters and writing articles and declarations and resolutions and all of this stuff. There was a public debate. It was in the zeitgeist. There was discussion, dinner table discussions, all this stuff about the ideas. It was the ideas first that were embraced and that caused the true revolution in people's hearts and minds that then led them to the appropriate actions to secure their rights. Which makes you think and question our circumstances today. And if children are not even being taught the ideas, how in the world can we act upon those ideas? Certainly when they become voters and as they get older. So then you have George Washington saying the best means of forming a virtuous and happy people will be found in the right education of youth. Without this foundation, every other means, in my opinion, must fail. My assessment is that schools, the school system writ broadly, public, charter, even most private schools, schooling as an institution has two main problems: sins of omission and sins of commission. So a sin of, I'll start with commission, is intentionally teaching whatever you want to call it, propaganda, indoctrination, bias, right? Teaching things to children, using that platform as kind of an agenda, an opportunity to push a narrative, other than just teaching kids how to think and letting them explore on their own, okay? And today's curriculum is very much slanted towards that type of commission of teaching kids what to think, right? It's teaching to the test. It's here's what's going to be, what you're going to be quizzed on. Here's what you need to know. It's what I call pump and dump. It's what I did. right? Test coming up. Oh, let's cram my head full of stuff, right? We call it cramming for a test for a reason. And then, oh, I'm done with the test. Okay, let's, move on. And I don't need to, hey, teacher, when am I ever going to need to use that information? Oh, someday you'll, like, we all know this, right? And so this is the sin of commission. Now, the sin of omission is omitting things that children need to know, right? It's not teaching truths. It's just not bringing them up. What school curriculum talks about free market economics or property rights or entrepreneurship, personal freedom, religion, the R word, right? Like this stuff is omitted. The golden rule. I mean, basic social, economic, and political ideas that are what led this country to become as great as it once was. And they're just not even taught in class. Kids aren't exposed to them. And then the problem I see consistently, I speak at a lot of especially homeschool conventions and stuff, and the response I consistently get from the new homeschool parents, for example, is just massive anxiety because they themselves are often the product of public school. And now they find themselves in a position of feeling like they have to know all the things to their kids. And oh, I don't know, I never learned, right? Like with our Tubbleton's books, which we'll talk about in a minute, every day I get multiple emails from parents saying, I never learned any of this stuff. Oh my gosh, I'm learning along with my kid, like what spontaneous order is, or, like these parents are blown away of what they're learning because they were never taught this stuff. We were never taught this stuff. And so that's the sin of omission. The system is not teaching our kids. We can be as upset as we want over the whack-a-mole issue of the day, and we should. These are issues to get fired up about. They are problems that need to be dealt with. I don't mean to diminish these actual problems that we face. We got to face them. But we have to recognize that once we've whacked that mold down, we got to start like tearing the thing open and like going down deep, right? That should be like our foot in the door to do much more rather than feeling like, we succeeded. Let's just, go back on whatever we were doing before. Sins of commission and sins of omission. And the problem, the reason why the power brokers, the powers that be, whatever you want to call them, want us ignorant is, yes, the C word. It's so that we can be controlled. But I think it's more than that. Imagine that your next door neighbor starts spreading trash all over the front yard, okay? One of those like TV shows of like hoarders or whatever they call it, right? Like those people that are just pack rats and keep everything. And it's all over the front lawn and it just starts spilling out and it's more and it's more. Okay, now like an old car tire is on your front lawn and then like a beer can and like all these, it just starts spilling over, okay? But there's a problem. Your front yard, you're not quite sure where the property boundary is. You think it's kind of somewhere in the middle of the grass, but you're not exactly sure. Well, because you're uncertain, you lack the ability to go to that neighbor and say, here's my property line, keep your trash on your side, right? Because he can challenge you on it and say, well, you don't know where it is. Who are you to tell me that it's not over there? And because of your uncertainty, you basically retract because you can't confidently stand up and say, that's my property boundary, get off my lawn. That is the equivalent of our collective ignorance today about what our rights are, what freedom actually is, what our liberties are. It's not enough to just say, that's unconstitutional. I mean, I can't tell you how many times during, lockdown and mandates and masks and stuff, I would get emails and social media tags, and these well-meaning individuals would be standing up for their freedom, but they lacked the understanding of any details. And so they would throw out words like unconstitutional or immoral and feel good about it. It was a good release. But the problem is that if you're not specific, if you don't know what you're talking about, you can be easily dismissed. I've seen this on Capitol Hill time and again. Well-meaning parents get organized and they come up and they criticize something, but they don't quite have all their facts wrong. Awesome for coming up, awesome for speaking out, totally to be applauded. But the very fact that you did not have the information correct means that those that you're trying to persuade are not likely to be persuaded. And those who are opposed to what you're saying are going to be able to attack you and discredit what you stand for because you don't have all your information right. Right? This is why ignorance is so dangerous. So we cannot defend rights that we don't know exist. If we want to adequately protect our freedoms, we have to understand them more than at a superficial level. Thomas Jefferson said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be. I really like the story of, you guys know who Frederick Douglass is, the former slave, right? And he would learn how to read and started writing a lot. And he made such an interesting point. It wasn't a novel idea, but he, of course, had the authority to speak out on this stuff as a former slave, that the slave states, it wasn't just that slavery was illegal. It was also criminalized to teach a slave how to read. Why?
Because then they start desiring freedom.
Because once you start reading, you understand what your rights are. In fact, in this book I mentioned I'm reading, there's a whole chapter on how it was the Declaration of Independence that led to slavery being ended. Because before then, everyone all over the world, this was just an institution that had existed forever. No one, maybe except the Quakers, really ever challenged it. People might have been like, awkward about it, but it just existed and no one really thought otherwise. They had inherited this for generations, but it was the Declaration of Independence saying all men are created equal that created the first time where people would then apply pressure, political pressure to slavery and use that one line, all men are created equal, as a basis to start pushing back against this institution, passing resolutions, making it illegal in different places, stopping importation, and all of these things that took decades to resolve. But it was the Declaration of Independence that planted that stake in the ground and said, all men are created equal. It was that philosophical position that led to all of that happening. And so you have Frederick Douglass, right, saying there's a reason why they wanted to criminalize reading, because at the time, there was even in one state, there were a few slaves that sued in court, tried to sue in court, using the Declaration of Independence shortly after it was passed as a basis for their lawsuit. Because they're like, look, you guys just said all men are created equal. We're men. Let us go. And of course, that lawsuit didn't really go anywhere. But those slaves were more educated and enlightened than most of their counterparts, and they were at least trying, and good for them. And so Frederick Douglass over and over again is talking about the connection between ignorance and slavery consistently. And look, we don't have, the same slavery today. But part of the problem is that we have intellectual chains we don't even know exist. We think we're free. What's that quote? Was it Upton Sinclair? I'm going to get this wrong. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who don't even know they're in chains. Something to that effect. Anyone know that quote? None are more hopelessly enslaved than those that don't even know they're in chains. I got it close enough. The point, right, is that if we don't even know about these problems and our ignorance, and we don't know when our rights are being violated and when the government has overstepped its bounds, what that even looks like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then we are enslaved because of our ignorance. And we think we have freedom and we blow up fireworks on the 4th of July. I say nowadays that that's more of a memorial to freedom than a celebration of present day freedom, but we can memorialize it all the same. Okay, so ignorance and our freedom, inseparably intertwined. We have to be educated. And so again, the problem that I see consistently as we're out there doing all this stuff with the Tuttle twins is the parents feel inadequate. Parents feel like they themselves were never taught sufficiently. How can I teach my kids something I don't understand? So that's why we're doing the Tuttle twins book. So I want to rattle off several topics, again, sins of omission that I feel like the system is not teaching, that form the basis of understanding how the world works and what life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness actually means. So if you want that broader understanding for your kids or yourself, I think it requires an understanding of, number one, economics. Now, I hated economics in college, hated it. Supply and demand curves and the intersection of the aggregate demand and the blah, like, no. Economics is all about the study of human action, why people behave the way they do. You ever like going to the mall and like, again, back when the malls were a thing, and like people watching? Anyone like I love people watching. Why did he do that? Or why did he buy that? Or, like human understanding humans is really interesting. That's economics. That's the fun kind of economics. So at freemarket.tuttletwins.com, we put together a whole economic curriculum for families that just uses activities and stories and fun stuff. You got to understand economics. Incentives. How do you incentivize people? What is demand? And anyways, economics is critical because it's how individuals interact. Entrepreneurship, key. If you go to Facebook or Instagram and search for Children's Entrepreneur Market, it's a big long word, or you can go to libertas.org/market. We put on kids markets all throughout Utah all summer long. They're like lemonade stands on steroids. Your kids can sell all kinds of stuff and gain entrepreneurial opportunities and experiences, make a whole bunch of money. Because seriously, like we send all these thousands of adults, advertising, go shop, and like these adults walk away broke because these cute kids are, hey, mister, will you buy this for $40? Yes, take my money, So anyways, so entrepreneurship is critical. There's so much more involved in that than just making money, right? Self-confidence, interacting with adults, negotiation, right? Supply chain, logistics, all kinds of stuff that you can unpack from learning about entrepreneurship or just thinking entrepreneurially. You don't have to start your own business. Anyone in any job can think entrepreneurially. Individual liberty. What are the dangers of socialism and collectivism? Super popular right now. The Squad, AOC, they look so cool. They're awesome, right? They're on all the social media platforms. It's hip. Hip probably isn't a word that the hip kids use today. Anyways, but what are the dangers, right? What does liberty actually mean, and why are these things a threat? Another topic, social responsibility and ethics. Something as basic as the golden rule. It's not just like, let's be nice to Betty down the street and help her across the street, right? Like, this is more substantive than that. How do we interact with one another through government, through business, different countries? There's a lot to unpack there. So social responsibility and ethics. Learning how to learn. You can Google Barbara Oakley. She's got a great class on learning how to learn. And having the freedom to pursue intellectual interests. I wrote a book called Passion-Driven Education. And it's all about leveraging a child's interests to build a custom education experience around what children actually care about. Rather than, hey kid, you must learn algebra and biology and blah, 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 right? You can actually customize an entire curriculum around the interests of your own child. So that's passion-driven education. Oakley, O-A-K-L-E-Y. So learning how to learn. Learning about the law and civics. What is government's proper role? What is it? What do we do about it when it exceeds that proper role? What about civil disobedience? That's a fun topic for kids. Now, you got to be careful because the teenagers especially will have but it's important. What about historical examples? When do we know when it's okay to stand up and say no? How far across the line does the government have to get? You read the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson says people will suffer for quite a while before they throw off those shackles and want to, substitute new government. But how long is long enough? Fun experiment that we do every 4th of July. I encourage your family to adopt this practice, is to read the Declaration of Independence, the list of grievances that they felt justified their separation from the world's largest superpower. Compare and contrast against the perceived grievances you have with the government today and see if things have gotten better or worse. Fun little thought experiment. Final thing that kids need to learn is property rights. We teach this to toddlers, right? Don't take his things, right? But there's so much more to that that has relevance to the foundations of a prosperous society. Now, so we do these, for those who don't know, the Tuttle Twins are children's books that teach all these ideas and more through fun stories to kids of different ages. And we've sold over 2.5 million. We translate them into a dozen languages. We're coming out with a cartoon this fall. You can find out about that at TuttleTwins.tv. So things are going crazy over in the Tuttle Twins department. But I do get my critics. Now, of course, there's like the socialists out there who, I have to share this story briefly. So there's a socialist magazine called Current Affairs. And I'm working one day and I get a little Google alert popping up on my computer. Oh, someone mentioned Tuttle Twins. And so I go, Current Affairs, what is that? And start reading this article and they are just attacking everything about the Tuttle Twins. Oh, this, free market trite teaching kids conservative values. This is all propaganda, blah, blah, blah. So I look into who they are. It's a socialist magazine. Here they are critiquing like my baby that I've invested, 7 years now of my life in building this thing. And anyone in my shoes, you might imagine, would just be feeling like, no, they're saying mean things. I have the biggest grin on my face the entire time I'm reading this thing because I know that this is a marketing gift, right? I go out, I create a coupon called Current Affairs for like 50% off the books or something. And I share this article all over social media, our email list, everywhere I could get people to listen. And this is a strategic marketing tactic, but it's basically planting a flag and like, hey, the socialists are attacking us. If you don't like socialists, then come on our side, right? And so everyone flocked over to the Tuttle Twins side of the line and bought. We sold, I think, over 15,000 books just in that sale. And so then we would tag Current Affairs, the magazine, all over social media. And they started getting really upset. So they created a Tuttle Twins coupon to buy their magazine. and I don't know behind the scenes what their revenue system is like, but they didn't get very much engagement on those ads and it probably fell flat. It's hard as socialists to be capitalist and actually sell things. You might feel some sympathy for them. Anyways, there's more to that story, but it's fun to share. So the socialists don't like what we're doing, obviously, but there are well-meaning people who might even agree with those of us in this room who lean more conservative that this is propaganda for kids, what you're doing with the Tuttle Twins books. Like, let kids be kids. I'll talk to my kids about it when they're teenagers, when they're 18 and it's time for them to vote. And I get that a few times a month, maybe, from reactions on social media or elsewhere. And what I want to tell you, I mean, this happened. Did you guys see just a few months ago in Bountiful when that kind of went a little viral in Utah circles where there was an elementary school and they had the ABCs? Anyone see this? A few nods. They had the ABCs all along the wall. A is for apple, B is for book or whatever. But it wasn't, it was like A is for activism, S is for social justice. Y is for yes, we can, which is Obama's thing. Like all these activist terms in elementary school. And apparently it was like the PTA president. And anyways, it went viral and she got her hand slapped and they pulled it all out. But how many of those things are happening without us? How many moles are going underground? We have voles in our front lawn right now, right? And so one pops up and I'm able to, but like how many voles are down there? I have no idea. We're playing whack-a-mole up here, but like what's happening when we don't know? Zoom school was like the greatest thing to happen. Why? Because parents could actually see a lot of what was being taught. How many parents, I've had so many parents that like wake up, quote unquote, in the past year because they were finally exposed to what their children were learning in school. Where was I going with all that? Tuttle Twins. Okay, so these people saying, oh, wait until they're adults, wait, your kids, our kids are being exposed to all kinds of ideas that you find repugnant. And we know our kids are sponges. And we know what's cool and hip, or whatever the 2021 equivalent of the word hip is today. It was sick for a while. I never understood the word sick. It's epic. Okay, all right. Whatever the word is. Our kids are being exposed to these ideas. And it's happening in school, and it's happening from the media, and it's happening from their peers, and it's all over their apps, and it's everywhere. I choose to give my children a bit of a defense, a foundation of critical thinking upon which they can evaluate all those ideas that they're going to expose to. I am not one to say, let me shield my child and let's go live in an Amish community away from everyone else. Like not that there's anything wrong with Amish. I envy them in a lot of ways. But I don't think seclusion, at least is what I want for my family. But if I don't equip my children with an understanding of the ideas that we believe in that I want to transmit to them, then like that pastor, I'll be sending my children to Caesar's school and they'll come home in a Roman uniform. And I'll wonder too late, what the heck? What happened? And then I'll be trying to play catch up in defense, and that doesn't end up going too well. So that's what we're about with the Tuttle Twins. So TuttleTwins.com. If you don't have the books, you can use the coupon 40 FORTY. I have so many books these days. I don't like, especially with my gimpy leg, I don't like hauling everything. But if you go to TuttleTwins.com, use the coupon 40 FORTY. You get 40% off and free activity workbooks, and then we'll just ship it to you. But my challenge to you is recognizing that whack-a-mole is a game almost intentionally designed to keep us distracted. And you can look into the Hegelian dialectic, and I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff that I have come to the position after my decade and a half of involvement that some of this stuff is manufactured outrage. You know how magicians use what's called sleight of hand? Do you know what that concept is? Look over here at this thing I'm doing. Well, you don't see what's happening behind my back where the real trick is happening, right? That's kind of the idea. And I feel like society is full of sleight of hand. While we're distracted over here with the daily outrage that we are going to change tomorrow, and we hear the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, there's stuff happening here. And we have to be aware, and we have to be intentional, and we have to recognize this is happening. We have to understand we've inherited a system that was designed by people whose ideas I certainly don't share to produce an outcome that I find repulsive and worrisome, for not only for my kids, but for our society. And so my invitation is to take the red pill. Let's drop the scales from our eyes, realize this is happening, and decide. For us, it's Tuttle Twins. Like I say, we need like 400 more people doing projects like this. It's a big challenge, but thanks for letting me rant for a while, and I appreciate your time. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't even have to use the chair. I don't know timing. Is there yet?
Are there any questions? What was the entrepreneur website again?
Entrepreneur website is Libertas. So the word liberty, but instead of a Y, there's an AS, libertas.org/market. Or if you just search Children's Entrepreneur Market on Facebook and Instagram, you'll find it. There's a few more markets left this summer throughout the valley that we're doing. Your kids will make more money than you do. Yes.
So what is your, I kind of know the answer to this, but what is your opinion on vouchers and that system, as far as, I know that there are many parents who, you know, as just the way society is developed right now, who need their kids to be at school because they both need to work.
Totally.
Right? And so what is your, I guess my opinion is that vouchers is a way to give power to the parents to decide what school their kid is going to.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we, I guess that would be my question, and maybe it's a better question for our representative that's here.
We all know that monopolies are awful. Why? What's bad about a monopoly?
They get control exactly what you're getting. And
Okay.
the quality.
Quality does what? Goes down, and the cost?
Goes up.
Because they have no competition. Public schooling is monopoly. Quality goes down, price goes up. All monopolies improve when they have competition because they're incentivized to do so. Vouchers, personal feeling, was okay, but the problem is that all of the money, so the way vouchers work is it's like you want to pull your kid out of public school, here's the money, and you can go to a private school. Two major problems with vouchers. Number one, we don't have very many private schools in Utah, so the supply would be very low. Although if there was a robust voucher system, private schools would pop up. But number two, there's a regulatory problem. If all of that money flows to Connor's private school, then the regulation can flow there very easily. Oh, Connor's private school, you're getting all that government money? All right, we're going to regulate you, and and private schools don't want that. Better model is education savings accounts. So those of you who have an HSA, you know that you got your money there, you swipe the card whenever you're buying medicine or doctor's visit or any qualifying expense, and then that's covered under an HSA. Similarly, an ESA would be, the money would be loaded on an account that you control, and you could buy books on Amazon, go on a field trip, get a tutor, do a homeschool thing, do a whatever, like And because it's decentralized like that, the regulatory problems go away. These are popular now, increasingly popular across the country. We have one now in Utah for special needs kids. Allison, wave your hand. I have to leave, so thank you for letting me go first, because we're going on a trip tomorrow and I still need to go help my family pack. So I have to leave right after this. I encourage you to talk to Allison after. She's heading up a group called Education Opportunity for Every Child. So she's working with Utah Parents United to get the word out, and they are focused precisely on this issue of increasing education opportunities like ESAs for families. So if you're interested in that, talk to Allison in the yellow shirt after.
Connor, we have one question from the
Please.
chat. What was the name of the book that you're reading?
I will tell you in 2 seconds because I posted it on Facebook. All right, here we go. My profile. Oh, it's an amazing book. It is more kind of philosophical and brainy. So just be aware. It's called America's Revolutionary Mind. Here, the Zoom people can even see it. America's Revolutionary Mind, a moral history. Well, I won't tell you the long subtitle. It's by C. Bradley Thompson. America's Revolutionary Mind by C. Bradley Thompson. Amazing book. Really cool book. You guys have like 14 books you need to go read now. Lots of homework. Good? Okay, thanks everyone, appreciate it.